Welcome to Spooky Halls. On tonight's episode, we will be actually telling two stories, both from Reddit user Doomed Dragon 682. The first story that we will cover is called Never Go Out on Cloudy Days. In my hometown, there's one rule everyone follows. Never go out when it looks like it's going to rain. It sounds like common sense to not go out in the rain, but for some reason it's treated like a law in my town. It's even taught in schools. There's signs all over town. The local news will even tell you not to go outside. And not only that, you can't even look outside if it's really bad. I tried to open the curtains once, just to see what it looked like, when my father yanked me away and threw them shut. It was one of those only times he yelled at me. It was on one such cloudy day that me and my cousin Dylan, he was about 10 and I was 14, sat playing board games in my room. Our parents had gone out to some kind of party and we were stuck alone with Monopoly and the like. We wouldn't be playing on my game system, but unfortunately, an accident involving my half-asleep father and a forgotten roller skate had rendered it, broken. I had just collected $200 from Pass and Go when Dylan rolled onto his back and proclaimed a phrase that's second nature to young children. I'm bored. I'd looked up at him. Well, if you want, we can watch TV. He sighed loudly. There's nothing good on TV. I hate being cooped up inside. Why can't we go outside anyway? Because it's cloudy, I responded while organizing my paper money. He sat up and looked at me. And why's that? I looked up at him. What do you mean? I mean, why can't we go out because it's cloudy? It's not like rain is gonna kill you. I shrugged. Let's ask our parents when they get back. He let out a long, exasperated sigh, and I internally sighed. He was not gonna let this go. I looked at him. Then let's go look out the window. He perked up at that. Really? Let's go. He rushed upstairs and I followed. I didn't really share his enthusiasm or curiosity. What's the worst that would happen? At most, it would probably just rain, and he'd complain some more. As we got upstairs and went to the window, he was practically bouncing with excitement. I opened the thick curtains on the window a crack. I was afraid of the neighbors seeing and telling my parents. And the scene that greeted me was exactly what I suspected. Nothing. It was the usual street, just devoid of people taking their pets for a walk or cars driving around. The sky was dark and gray. The clouds hanging so low, they almost looked like they had touched the tops of the trees in the distance. As I looked at it, I saw some patches that were slightly darker than the rest. I didn't think much of it. Must be a weird weather phenomenon. I shrugged. I told you, it probably wouldn't even rain. It hardly does around here, even when it's cloudy as it is now. He sighed and looked out again, then paused. What's that? I looked up and out the window to whatever he was pointing at. For a moment, I didn't know what he meant. Then I noticed it. It was some kind of cord dangling from the sky. It was thick, about the thickness of a power line, and it just hung there, unmoving. When I tried following it up with my eyes, I saw it just led into the clouds. Dylan started walking towards the door, and I stopped him. What are you doing? I want to go see what it is. It's a cord. That's all. But where does it lead? I didn't have an answer to that one. Maybe it was connected to a weather balloon. But if that's the case, wouldn't it be floating around? Before I could stop him, Dylan opened the door and ran out. I stood in the doorway and watched him. A part of me wanted to chase after him, but another part of me was scared. And it wasn't just the fear of being caught and getting in trouble. It was some kind of deep primal fear. My brain kept telling me something was wrong and that I should run inside and hide. Before I could decide what to do, Dylan made it to the cord and looked it up and down. He turned to me and yelled, "It looks slimy." I blinked at that. Slimy? What kind of power cord is slimy? Maybe it just looks slimy? I was about to call him in when suddenly he reached out and grabbed it. As soon as he did, I froze. I don't know what I expected to happen, but for some reason I was scared. Like I expected it to shock him or something, but nothing happened. He turned to me and yelled again, "It feels weird." By this point, I was deeply unsettled and called for him to come inside. I saw him roll his eyes and turn to me, "Fine, whatever." He started to walk towards me, but didn't let go of the cord. I called for him to let it go, and he turned to it and looked confused. I saw him shake his hand a few times, but the cord never left his hand. But now he looked panicked and started to flail about. "It won't come off. It won't let go on my hand. It's stuck." I was about to step out of my doorway and run to help him when suddenly, before I could even process what was happening, he flew straight up in the air. I was frozen in place as I watched him get pulled further and further up towards the clouds, kicking and screaming for help. And then, just before he vanished from sight, I saw something that froze my blood in its veins. 4 long, segmented legs slowly descended from the clouds and grabbed Dylan. As I watched, they wrapped him in the same cord that had trapped him and retreated into the clouds, into the same dark spot I saw earlier, which began to move before my eyes, quickly making its way to the horizon and out of sight. When my parents returned home, they found me curled on the floor in the basement. There were no signs of Dylan. When I explained what I saw, I expected them to say I was lying or tell me I had a nightmare. Instead, they looked at each other sadly and told me it was going to be okay. The next time I saw Dylan's parents was a few days later. I was in a room when I heard a crying downstairs in the living room. I slowly made my way to the stairs and peeked into the living room. I saw Dylan's mom and dad, my aunt and uncle, sitting on the couch. My aunt was crying while my uncle tried to comfort her. I quietly went back upstairs. I couldn't face them. It's been years since then. I've since moved out of my hometown and into a city. I live a pretty normal life and I keep to myself. But I still haven't completely recovered from what I saw. I never go out when it's cloudy. I don't know if what I saw was confined to only my town or if there are more. But I also never fly on planes because I'm terrified of what I'll see if I'm on the other side of the clouds. Story 2. I used to work for a logging company. It was a pretty good job. The pay was good, and it was nice to spend time out in the mountains. I made pretty good friends with the other workers. We'd sit together during lunch breaks occasionally and talk about sports and politics. Though usually, whenever I got the chance, I spent my time alone in the woods. Usually on walks or eating my lunch on a stump. I guess you could say it was ironic. A guy who loves nature working for a logging company. But really, most companies aren't as evil as people would believe. We make sure to only take trees from a marked area. And the areas we took trees from usually didn't have many animals. We even plant some new trees after we were done. Although one day, as we were working, I noticed something. A few of the trees that we had cut down hadn't been marked. We were taking trees from outside our acre of land. I went to discuss this with the foreman. He told me we had to start upping production. When I asked him why, he gave some half-assed line about increased demand and corporate changes, all while looking at a shiny new Rolex. That definitely got on my nerves. I left to go clear my head in the forest. I didn't like logging outside the marked area. It's that kind of greed that's going to end up destroying the forest around us. Pretty soon, there won't be anything left. I sat on a log and began contemplating what, if anything, I could do. Soon my thoughts were disturbed by a voice. It sounded old and tired and reminded me of creaking wood. "Good evening." As I looked around to find the source of the voice, my eyes fell on an old man. Old. The guy looked ancient. He had a long gray beard that fell past his chest, and his face was wrinkled and weathered from time. Through his eyes were still a bright blue that shimmered with intelligence and something else. I couldn't really place it. He wore a friendly smile, and I saw he was wearing an old thick shirt and pants, and I saw he wasn't wearing shoes. The next thing I noticed were the twigs sticking out of his hair and stuck to his clothing. I replied politely, "Evening, sir. What brings you here?" It wasn't unheard of for people to wander on our sites. They usually just asked for directions or complained about us being evil. But this guy didn't look like that type, though. He looked like an old man who was lost in the woods. Maybe he was homeless? Either way, I didn't see any reason to be unjustly rude and run him off. I moved to the side and offered him a seat next to me, which he took. When he sat down, I could have sworn I heard his bones creak. It was probably just the wind in the trees. He sat for a moment, as though taking in the calm in the air before he spoke. "Well, I was out on a stroll when I noticed you sitting out here and scowling. And I figured something must be wrong for you to be angry on such a fine day, in such a lovely part of the woods." The old man spoke in a friendly, happy-go-lucky tone, and it put me at ease. At least he wasn't deranged or anything, though I also chuckled a bit at what he said. If things keep going on in this part of the woods, they won't be here much longer. He turned to me at that with a slight look of confusion, and I thought a hint of anger. "Well, why's that?" "I know you lumberjacks are working near here, but isn't this spot off limits?" I was surprised at that. I guess he knew about the work we were doing here. He must have seen the marked trees. Maybe he used to work for a logging company a while back. Though it's been a while since anyone called us lumberjacks. I debated on telling him what was going on, but eventually I figured it probably won't hurt. Hell, if anything, I'd hope he'd tell the papers. Maybe that would knock some sense into the foreman. I explained the situation, how my boss was getting greedy and logging outside the marked area, and pretty soon the whole grove would be gone. The old man sat in silence for a moment. Then eventually he stood, puffed out his chest. "Well, that just ain't gonna do." And stuff that he behaved marching towards our work site. I stood and hurried after him. For an old man, he sure moved quick. I planned on stopping him before he made it to the site. The last thing I needed was an old man yelling at my foreman and my foreman getting pissed at me for telling him what was going on. But suddenly I stopped. Where had the old man gone? I had taken my eyes off of him for a moment to make sure I didn't trip over a root, and when I looked back, he was completely gone. Not so much as a footprint left. In the spot where I thought I'd last seen him, there was just a large oak tree. Had I imagined him? If that was the case, then I had a whole new set of issues. That's when I heard the screams. I was used to hearing people shout when a tree fell or if something went wrong, but these were screams of panic and terror. I bolted through the trees for the site as fast as I could, and I came to a scene of pure madness. The forest was attacking. That's the only way I can think to describe what I saw. Tree limbs lashed out at men running for cover, clawing at them with bare branches and knocking them to the ground. Vines wrapped around one man's neck and dragged him into the foliage. You heard his screams come to an abrupt halt soon after. Another man fell into a thick bush, and I heard the sound of flesh tearing as the branches tore at his body and forced their way in through his ears, nose, mouth, and even eyes. They continued until there was nearly nothing left of him. I saw the foreman making a mad dash for one of the pickup trucks. I was rooted to the spot as he passed over a man slowly being dragged into the ground by the roots of a stump. He kicked the man's flailing hands away and made it to the truck. He got in, and as soon as the engine started, he floored the gas, and I heard the sound of the tires struggling. Roots and grass were wrapping around them to prevent any movement. Then I heard another sound. It was a massive thudding sound accompanied by a deep groaning noise. A giant stepped in to the clearing. It seemed to be made completely out of vegetation. I saw its thick limbs were covered in hard bark, and roots covered them like muscle and sinew. Its head was a thick mass of leaves that took the shape of a thick beard and wild hair. I recognized it as the old man, though now his eyes were green, an unnatural green, as though you had to concentrate the greenest meadow or forest and split it into two orbs. It took heavy, lumbering steps towards the foreman's truck and made it there just as the foreman threw the door open and fell out. He tried to crawl away, but the old man, or whatever he was, grabbed the foreman by the leg. He screamed in a way I never expected to hear from a man of his size as the giant lifted him into the air. He flailed and struggled, and I expected the thing to crush him or tear him in half. Instead, it hugged him. Then, as I watched it petrified, it slowly began to grow around him. Vines and bark encompassed his body as he slowly melted into the giant's body. Eventually, his screams became muffled, then silent. The giant lowered its arms and looked at me. I was afraid I was next when suddenly it gave me a friendly smile. I blinked a few times, still trying to comprehend what I'd just seen. When the giant turned and lumbered into the trees, I looked around, expecting to be surrounded by an utter bloodbath, but was surprised to see the clearing was utterly peaceful. No sign of an attack at all, not so much as a drop of blood on a leaf. I stood silently for a minute before I radioed another team. I didn't know what to say, so I told them I came back from lunch to find everyone was gone. The police were called, but there was no sign of any of the men. I was a suspect, but there was no evidence of me doing anything. They also had no idea how one man could kill and dispose of so many people, so it was dropped. I don't know if they ever came to some kind of conclusion or if they just decided that it couldn't be solved. I quit my job after that. I got a nice home in the countryside near a state park. It's a pretty peaceful life. I got a dog, and the two of us go on walks every day. I've been talking with a nice woman I seen in town. I even got a new career as a park ranger. I never really forgot what happened that day, though. And the reason I'm writing this is because I was on patrol the other day when I came across something, a tree. Now this might surprise you, but in a state park, there are a lot of trees. What surprised me was what was in the tree. A Rolex watch. It had been weathered by time and was no longer as shiny as when I last saw it, but I knew it was the same watch. I stood and stared for a while before turning and walking back to my station. Have you ever heard of the Green Man? He's an old pagan god of nature, a guardian of the forest. He's supposed to be benevolent, not harmful most of the time, but he's still a god. And gods are unpredictable, especially one as ancient as the world itself. As I'm writing this, I looked up out my window and I saw something that made me pause. The branches outside my window look oddly like the smiling face of an old man. I'm not scared. I didn't think he means me any harm. Though, I did hear that another logging crew went missing recently. My only real hope is that they deserved it. Maybe they were moving out of their territory, like mine. I choose to think that because the alternative sends shivers down my spine. Thank you for listening to this episode of Spooky Halls. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to check out our other videos, and please subscribe.